Event 72 Prologue. The shadow in the sun. They told the public it was just an eclipse, a rare alignment, nothing more. The skies darkened, birds fell silent, and millions looked up through filtered lenses and camera phones to witness the moon. Swallow the sun, but no one saw what really happened, except the dead satellites and the men who buried them. At 13:04 UTC, for 74 seconds, ultraviolet surveillance drones caught something behind the sun. Not in front of it, not part of it, behind it. An entity vast and silent, as if space itself had turned its head to look down upon Earth. No eyes, no face, just a shape, a presence. Tendrils like solar flares, fractal limbs laced with nebulae, stretching across the sky like a god waking from a long sleep. It didn't speak. It marked from Cairo to Seoul, from a prison in Siberia to a farmhouse in Montana. It touched people, chosen or cursed, no one knew. The UV cameras picked it up first. Spirals burned into skin, invisible to the naked eye. Symbols older than language. Some were on foreheads, some across spines. One was found beneath a woman's tongue. And then, it was gone. The being vanished. The moment the moon passed the sun, not a trace remained in the visible spectrum, just confused spectators, shaky videos, and government cleanup crews already en route. The public never learned what happened. The ones who were marked did. At first, they heard whispers, then dreams, then power. Some called it evolution, others called it infection. But what unified them was one truth. Something had noticed Earth, and it had left a part of itself behind. 72 individuals, 72 ticking time bombs. Now, they're changing. Some slowly, some violently, some beautifully, but all inevitably. Name is Agent Hollis. I'm part of a team tasked with finding them, before something else does, and I fear we're already too late. Chapter 1. The boy in the barn. The file was thin, too thin. One photograph. Mason Thorne, 17. A senior at some high school with too few hallways and too many hunting trophies in the gym. He had that kind of face. Hopeful, sharp-edged, maybe a little too smart for where he lived. He could have been anyone's brother. Now he was missing, and maybe worse than missing. I studied his school photo as the truck bounced over a frost-hardened trail, headlights barely cutting through. The rural dark. We were 35 miles from the nearest hospital, 2 hours from the closest airbase, and we were already late. The mother's 911 call had been short, fragmented. She'd whispered about Mason locking himself in the barn, said he hadn't eaten in days, that he was speaking in voices she didn't recognize, multiple voices, and then static, click, line dead. Local cops came out and saw enough to call us, which meant they'd seen too much. I pocketed the photo. Up front, Reyes drove in silence, fingers tight on the wheel. In the back, Lynn scrolled through the UV drone feed while Cole cleaned the lens on his tranq rifle with religious precision. Everyone had their ritual before an encounter. Mine was a lie, I told myself. This one will be different. This one will be human. We parked on the edge of Thorne property. Old farmland, long neglected, dying under the weight of winter. The barn loomed in the distance like a silhouette of memory. Its roof sagged, half-eaten by rust and storm damage, and the wind moaned through broken slats like something grieving. I activated my neck implant, a soft pulse against the base of my skull. In a blink, the world overlaid itself with UV detail, purples and sickly whites dancing across the ground like veins. Our boots left no heat signature. The land was dead. The house itself was quiet. Inside, dishes in the sink, blood on the floor. Not pooled, just smeared in long, dragging lines. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just absence, like someone had erased the family from reality. The barn was locked from the inside, which meant we weren't the first ones out here. But we might be the last. Drone feeds live, Lynn said in my earpiece. One life sign, interior, upper loft, UV flares. Off the charts. Active mark? Confirmed he's flaring hard. Cole chambered around. Do we sedate? Only if he resists, I said. We need him talking. Reyes muttered, assuming he's still sane enough for that. We circled wide, flanking the main entrance. The door wasn't locked anymore. It had been torn off, split like firewood, and left in pieces on the frost-bitten ground. Something had come out, or gone in. Inside, the barn smelled of copper and rot. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the roof, painting broken lines across the hay-covered floor. Every animal was dead. Sheep, pigs, a cow near the back. All untouched, but with eyes burned to ash. No wounds, just husks. I felt it before I saw it, that pressure behind the eyes, the hum in the air. Then the drone feed pinged. Top of the loft, Lynn said. He's there. We climbed the ladder slowly, rifles raised, breaths shallow. He was floating. 6 feet off the loft floor, arms limp at his sides, head tilted up like he was trying to see the stars through the roof. His shirt was torn. His skin gleamed under. UV, not with sweat but with light, pulsing from beneath the surface like bioluminescence. The mark curled from his chest up to his cheekbone, 3 vertical lines intersecting a spiral. The tethered sun. The worst kind. Eyes on, I whispered. Do not engage. His lips were moving. No sound. I stepped closer. Mason? I said. He didn't flinch, but his eyes opened. Pale, glowing in the UV like headlights through a fog. Then he spoke. He sees through the shadow of the sun. The second door opens soon. The voice wasn't his, not entirely. It echoed strangely, deeper than his throat, like something old was borrowing his lungs. And then, Agent Hollis, my name. Spoken calmly, he smiled. And that's when he began to burn, not fire, not flame. Light, ultraviolet light exploded outward from his body, like a supernova held inside a glass jar. My vision went white, then violet, then black. I stumbled back. Cole fired. Lynn screamed over the comm. The barn shook, wood snapping, beams buckling, and Mason hovered, arms out, radiant and impossible. Through the flare, I saw it. For a moment, just a flicker in the light behind his eyes. The being. The same shape captured by the drones during Event 72. A shadow crowned in solar tendrils, vast and indifferent. Watching, and just like that, the flare was gone. Mason dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Smoke curled from his skin, and his mark, once pulsing like a heartbeat, was now charred, burnt into the flesh like an old scar. I reached him first. He was still breathing. Barely, and beneath his body, drawn into the dust in his own blood, were words none of us had written. He lives, he listens, he returns. Chapter 2. Static Between Stars. The base wasn't on any map. It was buried under a decommissioned airstrip in Greenland. An old Cold War relic repurposed for a new kind of arms race. No flags flew here. No insignia marked the walls. The people who worked inside didn't wear name tags, and the men who funded it didn't officially exist. They called it Orion Redoubt, and it was the only place on Earth actively studying what Event 72 had left behind. I stood behind 2 inches of reinforced glass, watching Mason Thorne float inside a negative pressure chamber. We'd stabilized him. Barely. His pulse was erratic, his EEG useless. His mark had cooled to a dull charcoal black, but every so often it would flicker faintly, like an old film reel catching fire 1 frame at a time. Dr. Asha Virani stood beside me, arms folded, her brow creased in thought. She was short, sharp-eyed, with an accent that sounded like Mumbai run through a grinder of British universities and NATO briefings. Her hair was pulled back in a braid so tight it might have been woven from wire. You said he spoke to you, she said. He knew my name. Could have heard it on the comms. I shook my head. He said it before I keyed my mic, Asha. Didn't look surprised. She tapped her tablet, pulled up neural scans of Mason's brain. A chaotic blur of overlapping frequencies, some of which didn't even map to normal human brainwave activity. There's a signal pattern here, she said. Repeating sequences, almost like a language. From him, from something, maybe through him. She glanced over her glasses. Hollis, do you know what we call this stage of transformation? I didn't answer. I already knew. Emergent cognition. The marked don't just change physically. Their minds begin to interface with something else, some remote intelligence bleeding through the cracks of their consciousness. Most break, some adapt, a rare few. Invited in. He was drawing in his blood, I said quietly. Writing. Message. I saw the photos. You translate it yet? She hesitated. A rough version. It's not English, not even cuneiform, but I think it means he waits in the between. Between what? She didn't answer, just looked through the glass at Mason, who floated like a fallen angel in a box of white light. Something's changed, she said finally. This one's not like the others. How many have flared this hard? None. A pause. Until now. Later, in the situation briefing room, we met with command. The lights were low. Maps and drone feeds flickered across wall-sized displays, most of them bathed in ultraviolet overlays. There were 12 red dots across the map now, active marked signatures. 2 in Europe, 1 moving across South America, 1 buried in Siberia. They pulsed in sync, like stars breathing in unison. Something had activated them. Reyes leaned in, close to me, and whispered, "You think this is the second door?" I didn't answer, because I was starting to think the first door had never actually closed. Meanwhile, in a skyscraper in Tokyo, a woman named Sayuri Kaito had stopped speaking to humans. She now whispered only to power lines, listening for patterns in the static, and they whispered back in voices only she could hear. "He is coming. You are the key. Open the circuit. Let him through." Sayuri began to smile, and somewhere in the dark beyond the stars, something smiled back. Chapter 3. Signal Ghosts. Tokyo, Euro 4. 12. JST. Sayuri hadn't slept in 11 days. Not that she needed to anymore. Not since the mark appeared. A faint spiral etched behind her left ear, invisible in mirrors but radiant in reflections that weren't hers. Sometimes it burned, sometimes it whispered, and sometimes in the hum of neon signs or the flicker of a dying light bulb, it sang. She used to be an electrical engineer. Now she was something else. The office tower where she lived had no tenants anymore. She had shut off the elevators on day 3. By day 5, the only way up was through the emergency stairwell, which she'd sealed from the inside with copper wire and salt. The city still breathed around her. Trains ran, lovers fought, advertisements glowed, but she existed slightly outside of it now. Tuning forks didn't vibrate the same in her hand. Radios wept static when she walked by. Birds no longer flew near her window. In the dark, she could hear the grid speak. Low frequency, residual echo, old names under newer names. He watches through the current. He is encoded in silence. Her apartment was a shrine of circuitry. Wire lattices covered the walls like spider webs. Radios gutted and reassembled. CRT televisions, playing loops of snow, no signal. A speaker suspended by fishing wire, repeating a single frequency. Herzodia Sayuri sat cross-legged in the center of it all, fingertips resting on 2 copper nodes. Her eyes rolled back as a soft hum filled the air, one that didn't come from any machine she'd built. Her voice, when it came, was not her own. He was a star before language, a thought before light. And now, he seeks voices to carry him. Through? Her body convulsed. Blood ran from her nose, not red but violet under the black light. The mark behind her ear pulsed, and then her televisions came to life. All of them, dozens of them flickering with static, shifting into form. A face, or what might have once been one. Teeth too long. No eyes, just gaping pits of burning UV. It grinned across every screen. Not moving, radiating, like a transmission punching through the atmosphere from somewhere light couldn't reach. "You are the key," it said. "Open the way. Build the gate." Sayuri stood slowly, her body twitching with latent voltage. Her hair floated. The room pulsed with invisible current, every device groaning with overload. And with perfect calm, she spoke aloud. "Yes." 13 minutes later, Tokyo Tower experienced a blackout for the first time in 18 years. The cause was never found. Power lines fused, transformers burst. Signals jammed across half the city, and in the middle of it all, Sayuri Kaido walked barefoot into the center of Shibuya Crossing, her body glowing faintly violet under the streetlights. Above her, unnoticed by the crowds, a strange spiral burned, briefly across the sky, ultraviolet and beautiful. A new mark had gone active, Orion Redoubt, 2137. GMT agent Hollis stared at the rising global signature map as Tokyo lit up in crimson. 12 beacons, now 13. "They're waking up," Lin whispered behind him. "No," Hollis said, voice low, eyes locked on the map. "They're answering a call." Chapter 4. The Gate That Hums Tokyo. Nightfall rain slicked the streets in violet reflections. Neon flickered overhead like electric veins, kanji signage twitching in and out of focus as Agent Hollis pushed through the crowd. No uniform. No visible weapon, just a black coat, comms in one ear, and a hand never far from the hidden holster on his back. "Eyes on Kaido?" he asked. "Negative," Lin replied from the surveillance van 2 blocks out. "Drones can't get a lock. She's off the grid, literally. She's somehow scrambling our GPS in a 2-kilometer radius." "Do it analog, then," Reyes chimed in. "I'm picking up something on shortwave, a frequency spike near the old broadcasting tower. It's resonating with her UV flare." Then that's where she's going. The alley was narrow. Tokyo never lacked shadows, but this one felt deeper. Hollis moved quietly, every step echoing like he was descending into something older than the city. The buildings leaned over him like they were listening. Ahead, the broadcast tower, rusted, long abandoned, now pulsing faintly with a glow the human eye couldn't catch. But Hollis's UV implant lit up like a sunrise. The signal was coming. From inside, he keyed his mic. "Target's near, going dark." A pause, then. "Stay alive, Hollis." Inside, it was wrong. The tower wasn't just repurposed. It had been rewritten. Cables ran like vines. Symbols, the same spiral intersected with mirrored glyphs, were etched into the metal in burned patterns. In the center of the room stood a structure, roughly human height, roughly doorway-shaped. The gate, made from scavenged tech, old antennae, bent rebar, and something that shimmered like liquid code. It hummed with low, inhuman frequency. Too low for sound, but Hollis felt it in his bones. His fillings buzzed, his spine ached, and there she was, Sayuri Kaido, floating an inch above. The ground barefoot, eyes closed, hair dancing in currents that didn't exist. Her body was lit from within, not visibly, not really, but the UV spectrum bled from her pores, from her fingertips, from the mark behind her ear, now grown into a crown-like spiral across her skull. She opened her eyes. "You followed the hum," she said. Hollis raised his tranq pistol. "Sayuri Kaido, by order of the Global Anomalous Response Division, you're under detainment under Article 7-2. Her smile was sad. "You don't understand what's happening, Agent. I understand you're building a door to something we don't know how to close. I didn't build it. I just remembered how." She stepped aside. The gate flickered. Behind, Hollis saw a shape, not yet real, just an outline made of stars and shadow, the same silhouette that haunted his dreams. "The being from the Eclipse. You're trying to let it through," he said. "No," she whispered. "It's already here. I'm just letting it speak." And then the gate activated, a pulse, soundless, massive. A burst of violet light erupted. Through the room, Hollis fired, but the dart evaporated mid-air. Gravity twisted, his vision folded in on itself. Sayuri didn't move. She expanded, becoming more than one, flickering between versions of herself that shimmered in and out of time. Hollis. The voice hit him from inside his skull. Why do you fear the sun behind the sun? He dropped to one knee, blood leaking from his ears, trying not to scream. The gate throbbed, and then a second pulse. Sharper. This one from outside. A concussive blast tore through the tower. UV dampeners rigged by Lin. Reyes on overwatch. Glass shattered. Cables snapped and the gate sparked violently. Sayuri shrieked, not in pain but in frustration. And the vision snapped. She collapsed to the floor, twitching, eyes wide, whispering one final phrase. He sees you now. Hollis. 2 hours later, Sayuri was sedated in a containment cell. The gate, in pieces, but not inert. Asha Varani would later confirm that the brief activation caused synchronized tremors in all 13 marked around the world. A resonance vent. Not a door opening, a knock, and something on the other side had knocked back. Chapter 5. The Silent Directive, Orion Redoubt Classified Location, Greenland, 2204. GMT. The debrief was a bloodbath. Not in the literal sense, but you could feel it in the air. A tension coiled tight across every face, every rank. People, who used to finish each other's sentences, now sat at opposite ends of the room. No one looked directly at the map, because the map was getting worse. 17 active marked. 4 new flares in the past 26 hours. 1 in Kenya, 1 under the ruins of Pripyat. 1 walking barefoot through a wheat field in Kansas, glowing like a lighthouse. And 1 deep under the ice shelf just west of us. Whatever Sayuri had started wasn't over. It had only clarified one thing. The being could reach them through the marked. And now it knew we were watching. Commander Brome stood at the head of the table. Old-school military, flat stare, voice like granite and bourbon. He'd been with the agency since Event 03, back when it was just weird weather and psychic bleed. Now he looked like a man cornered by something he couldn't shoot. We moved to containment, he said. Full protocol escalation, all active. Marked are now designated Omega status. Gasps. Mutters. Hollis didn't need a translator. Omega means elimination, Asha said quietly. Brome nodded. We're past the luxury of ethics, Doctor. This isn't about understanding anymore. It's about survival. Wrong, Asha snapped. It's about fear. You don't kill what you don't understand. You talk to it. And risk letting it talk back? She stood. It already is. Brome turned to Hollis. You were closest to the gate. Closest. To her, what's your assessment? Hollis hesitated. His hands were shaking. He didn't even realize it. I think, he said slowly, we're making a mistake. Explain. They're not just hosts, they're conduits. We kill them, we don't sever the signal. We amplify it. We break the vessel, and whatever's on the other side comes pouring through. Brome's jaw tightened. So what? We do nothing? Wait until that thing walks through our front door? Asha stepped in. There's another way. Let me engage. Not contain. Not sedate. Communicate. That's suicide. No. It's science. A long silence. Then, request denied. She stared him down. No fear, just disappointment. You can't silence a signal this loud, Commander, she said softly. Eventually it sings through bone. She left. Later, Hollis stood outside Mason Thorne's chamber. The boy hadn't spoken since the barn. Not in English anyway. But he was drawing again. On the wall, in chalk, in patterns that made the eyes ache if you looked too long. Spirals within spirals. Glyphs nested in geometry that didn't obey human symmetry. At the center of it all, a door. And above it, 3 words. The second sun. Mason turned, looked directly at Hollis, and smiled. Not the boy's smile. Something else's. And in Hollis's comms, Lynn's voice cracked through. Sir, we lost contact with the Kenyan flare. It's gone dark. How dark? Like it was never there. Chapter 6. The Unlight Field, Kenya, Great Rift Valley, 0212. Eat Operation Hollow Signal. The Blackbird transport cut its engines at 15,000 feet. The descent was silent. A stealth halo jump, no lights, no electronics. The moment they crossed into the flare's last known coordinates, all tech died. GPS gone, comms jammed. Watches stopped ticking. It wasn't electromagnetic interference. It was like the laws of signal refused to exist here. Captain Danya Arendt checked her oxygen and glanced at her squad. 4 operators, each hand-picked for this. Psi-shielded, UV-trained, and equipped with analog gear only. Pre-digital, like relic hunters from a future that didn't trust its own machines. They hit, dirt without a sound, no animals, no wind. Even the stars above the valley were wrong, rearranged subtly. A sky that had never belonged to Earth. Then they saw it. A perfect circle scorched into the landscape. 50 meters wide. Jet black. No vegetation, no debris. Not burned. Erased. Danya reached down. The ground was cold. Even stranger, her Geiger counter, an old analog one from the 60s, ticked once. Then reversed. Ticked backward. She made a note in her logbook. No digital recordings, no radio contact. Just the team. And the hole in reality they now had to step into. They moved inward. The deeper they went, the more the world lost its texture. Colors bled into grayscale. Shadows pointed the wrong direction. The further in, the more they felt watched, not from above, but from below. One of the soldiers, Amos, began humming under his breath. Something about it felt wrong, like a lullaby with missing notes. "What is that?" Danya asked. He didn't answer. She looked closer. His eyes were pitch black, not just pupils, entirely black, reflecting nothing, absorbing light. And he smiled, a voice echoed, not from Amos, but through him. He woke here, first, in the pit before the dawn, in the silence beneath thunder. Amos lifted his rifle, turned it on himself, pulled the trigger. Click. No bullet, not a jam. It was like the gun forgot how to fire. He dropped to his knees, laughing, then screaming, then laughing again. They restrained him, injected a tranquilizer. He twitched, then whispered something before losing consciousness. There is no time in the middle. At the center of the circle, they found it. A structure not built, formed. A spire of fused glass and black stone humming in ultraviolet. It pulsed once every 13 seconds. With each pulse, one of the team would hear something different. A mother's voice, the ocean where none should be, themselves dying. A whisper from someone they buried years ago. The pulses were personal, and at the base of the spire, a mark. Larger than any they'd seen. Not spiraled, fractalized, self-replicating. An equation looping back on itself. Not written, not carved. Intended. Danya stepped forward, touched it, and suddenly, she wasn't in the valley anymore. She was in space, but it wasn't space. It was between. A place with no up, no down. A dark sea of rotating thoughts. And in the distance, through a membrane of ultraviolet lightning, she saw it, the being, or its reflection, staring back at her. It opened its mouth, and a voice tore through her thoughts. "You cannot stop a sunrise." Then she woke, back in the valley, sweating, bleeding from her ears. And the spire, gone, vanished. Only the team remained. And Amos, his mark had expanded. Covered half his body now. He opened his eyes and spoke for the first time in hours. I know his name now. Do you want to hear it? Chapter 7. The Name That Eats Sound Orion Redoubt. 6:47 GMT. The elevator descended past sub-level 9, the level no one spoke about, even in briefing rooms. There were no windows, no surveillance feeds, just steel, sensors, and silence. Captain, Danya Arendt watched the flickering lights above the elevator door. Her fingers twitched. She hadn't stopped sweating since they left the rift. Amos stood beside her, eyes black. Calm, almost serene. Every hour his skin got a little paler, a little smoother. Veins turned ultraviolet beneath the surface. He still looked like a man, but he was converting into something else, and he wouldn't stop smiling. Level 13. Mimetic Quarantine Vault. 2 guards saluted, then turned away, facing the wall as protocol required. Exposure to visual carriers was strictly forbidden. Dr. Asha Virani was waiting inside, pale, sleepless, angry. "You brought him here?" She snapped at Danya. "There was nowhere else. He's not a person anymore. He's a carrier." Danya nodded. "That's why you're here." Inside the vault, Amos sat in a chair bolted to the floor, wrapped in a Faraday web and surrounded by mirrored walls. 3 levels of acoustic dampening. Reality anchors buzzing softly in the corners of the room. Ancient tech salvaged from Event 19, unexplained but reliable. Asha stepped in, alone. She carried a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Nothing digital, analog only, bound in salt. "Amos," she said. He looked up. Anne said her name, backwards. That was new. "You told Captain Arendt you knew its name." He nodded. "I want you to write it." He laughed, not cruelly. Almost gently. "You don't write it," he said. "You become it." Asha froze. "What does that mean?" He leaned forward, and with perfect, terrifying calm, he said, "It's a name that hears itself being spoken." And then, the mirror cracked. No one touched it, no sound, no impact. But the surface split in a perfect spiral. Sirens wailed outside the vault. Reality anchors surged, then failed. Asha grabbed the reel-to-reel, bolted toward the door. Just as Amos began to speak again, voice rising in tone, in pitch, in resonance, she slammed the door behind her. Inside, he kept talking. Inside, the world began to warp. Inside, he vanished, just blinked out of existence. Outside the vault, Commander Brome was waiting. Red lights pulsed overhead, his expression unreadable. "What did he say?" he asked. Asha stared at him. The reel-to-reel buzzed in her hands, not spinning, but still recording. "He gave it a name." Brome didn't blink. "And?" "He said it's a name that hears itself." A long pause. "Destroy the tape," Brome ordered. "No." She held it close to her chest. "We can't stop this by staying blind. You're putting everyone at risk." Asha stepped forward, face inches from his. "Then start building. Better blindfolds." She walked away, tape in hand. That night, the stars above Orion shifted. Just slightly, but enough. Enough for someone watching closely to realize they were no longer random. They were forming something. A pattern, a glyph, a word. Chapter 8. The Unwritten Name Orion Redoubt 2312 GM'd. The hallways were darker than usual, not from lack of lighting, but from a presence that seemed to pull light into itself, warping everything around it. Amos was gone. Not missing, just erased. It had taken less than an hour. At 2312, security footage from the mimetic quarantine vault was pulled for review. There was a flash, and then he was simply not there anymore. No sign of physical collapse, no distortion, just a gap where Amos had been. Even Asha's analog tape recorder had caught nothing. There were no sounds. Nothing but a hiss. Dr. Asha Virani didn't sleep. Not anymore. No more pills. No more caffeine. She'd spent the last 14 hours working through older records. Things hidden in the agency's vaults that even Brome wouldn't acknowledge. Unclassified, but not in the public sense. Just things the agency had locked away for decades because no one wanted to touch them. And in the haze of too many hours, too much data, she began to see it. The name. Not just a collection of syllables, but a wave. A resonance that fractured the sound it made like light bending through water. She had written it down, not as it was given to her by Amos, but as she had been able to extract from her subconscious. It was anagrammed in ways she couldn't explain, reassembled with pieces of language that had no origin. The glyph Amos had whispered. It was not just a word, it was a sound, a frequency, a key to something other. She began to play it, not on digital equipment, not even through speakers. She spoke it into nothing, into a vacant room, letting it vibrate against the walls. And then she felt it. A hum. So low she almost couldn't. hear it, but it was there. The hum spread, and as it did, the air around her shifted. The lights above her flickered, not in failure, but in recognition, like they knew she was speaking to something. In the corner of the room, the old tape recorder hummed too. It listens. Asha closed her eyes. No, she whispered. The voice came again, but not from the recorder. It came from somewhere behind her. You called it. Now it speaks through you. She turned, heart racing. There was nothing in the corner. No face. No form. But the temperature dropped several degrees and a low vibration pulsed through her ribs. Hollis stood in front of the reinforced glass. He had to admit he was nervous, not in the way he'd been trained to be. Not like he feared physical harm. No, this was something deeper. This was something inside him. He had been exposed to the echoes of the name through Amos, through the recordings, through the presence that had shifted his own mind. He wasn't immune. None of them were. He thought he heard it once in the silence before sleep. A sound that didn't quite exist. A vibration without form. Just a feeling. It was waiting. It waits for you to call. Stop this, Hollis muttered to no one in particular, but he already knew it was too late. The night shifted again. The real sky outside Orion didn't change, but the satellite data did. At first, the analysts thought it was a glitch, but when it happened again, they knew something was distorting the orbits of the moons, the angle of the stars. Asha's voice echoed back in Hollis's mind. A name that eats sound. They had no control. No containment. No answers. And the mark, the one Amos had worn, wasn't done. It had only begun to echo. Beneath Orion's 0300 GMTI in the black vaults of Orion, hidden in plain sight, another door opened. Unseen. Only sound. Not the hum of electronics. Not the whine of dying power. The in-between and something that should have never been heard. Took its first breath. Chapter 9. The Breaking of Silence, Orion Redoubt 458. GMT, the breach wasn't detected immediately. When the alarms finally rang out, it was too late. The damage had already begun. Data corruption spread through the secure servers like wildfire, and the once pristine archives were filled with static, with noise. Hollis was the first to notice. The walls weren't the same anymore. He stood in front of a security panel, tracing the sudden shift in the air. The room felt off. The hum in the back of his head had been getting louder, almost like the walls themselves were breathing. He ripped open the access panel, staring at the code running in front of him. It was all garbled, a string of symbols he didn't recognize, but his eyes moved too fast over it, like the shapes were forcing themselves into focus. And then the voice. You're in the middle now. His hand trembled as he shut down the system. He wasn't sure what part of him was responding, fear, instinct, or something else. Something older. Didn't matter. It had already begun. Asha sat in her office, reviewing the tape. It was impossible. She had listened to it hundreds of times, trying to understand, trying to decode it. She knew the sound was significant, but it wasn't. Until she played it backwards that she heard the truth. She didn't want to believe it, she couldn't. But there it was, the name, the true name. It wasn't just one word, it wasn't even a language. It was a frequency. It was a way of hearing the world, of translating thought and being. But once you heard it, once you knew it, you couldn't unhear it. That was the danger. That was why it was called a mimetic hazard. The name was a virus. It lived in your thoughts, in your senses. Once you understood it, it would start to rewrite you. Rewire the way you saw the world you knew would be gone. Asha looked up at the screen. Her breath caught. The screen flickered, and then in the reflection a face appeared. It wasn't hers. It wasn't anyone from the agency. It was just a smile, a grin. And she heard it again, clear as day. I see you. Outside Orion 0459, GMT the world. Didn't know it yet, but the name had already started leaking out. Not in the way Asha thought it would. It wasn't through broadcasts, through media, or digital files. It was spreading subconsciously. The marked were beginning to awaken. It started with strange dreams. People waking in the night, unable to remember where they had been, but certain that something had changed. A young artist in Sao Paulo suddenly found herself painting fractals. Not patterns she knew, but shapes that made her feel like she was being watched. A guitarist in Vienna woke up one morning with a new melody stuck in his head, a haunting drone that sounded like the world itself was bending. And in Tokyo, a dancer began to move in patterns she could no longer explain. Her body seemed to twist against reality, breaking the laws of space and time. They were hearing it, they were feeling it. It was only a matter of time before they started acting on it. Orion Redoubt, 0522. GMTB Rome was pacing in the command center, his jaw clenched, tight. He hadn't been able to sleep. The situation was spiraling out of control. Amos's disappearance was the first breach. But what was happening now? This resonance? It was becoming global. He turned to Hollis, who had been staring at the monitors. The young agent's face was pale, his eyes wide. "You're hearing it too," Brome said, his voice low. Hollis nodded, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't know what it is," he said. "But it's here." Brome stepped closer, speaking, in a near whisper. "If we don't stop it now, it'll be too late. The name can't—" "I've already tried," Hollis interrupted. "We can't contain it. You can't fight something that already knows your fear." A tense silence hung. Between them, Brome's gaze darkened. "We have to stop Asha." Asha's office, 0542. GMT Asha wasn't surprised when the door burst open. She had expected it, actually. Expected someone to come for her. For the tape. For the truth. But she didn't expect this. Brome stood there, his hand tight on the grip of his gun. Behind him, 2 agents flanked him, their faces grim. "I'm sorry, Asha," Brome said, his voice full of regret. "But it's time to contain this. You're too far gone." Asha's hands were shaking. She glanced at the door, considering her options. Escape, but that wouldn't stop it. It was already inside her. She reached for the recorder. "Brome," she whispered, "I have to finish this." And then, the lights went out. Not just in her office, but across the entire redoubt, every screen, every light. Gone. And in the darkness, a low, rumbling voice echoed, deeper than anything human. "I am here." Chapter 10. The First Choice, São Paulo, Brazil, 0634. BRT Carolina sat alone in her apartment, fingers trembling as they hovered over the canvas. Her brushes were scattered across the table, each one caked with strange, glowing paint. It had started with the dreams, fractals, patterns, spirals she could never have created on her own. But as she painted, her hands seemed to move without her will. The brush would find its place, and when it did, she would see something in the strokes. At first, she thought it was just the late-night hours messing with her mind, a lack of sleep. But soon the shapes began to feel alive, as if the colors were connected to something else, something watching, guiding her. Now, staring at the latest piece, a swirling pattern of black and ultraviolet, Carolina saw the truth. The name had found her. It had marked her. And in doing so, she had become something different. She looked at her reflection in the window, staring at her eyes. Her pupils had started to change, becoming elongated, reflective, as if the universe itself was captured in them. There was no turning back. The painting began to pulse. It wasn't just color anymore. It was sound. She could hear it now, a low, vibrating hum that filled the room. It was a voice. "You have chosen. You will open the door." Carolina's heart raced. She hadn't chosen anything, at least, not consciously. But the voice was clear now, like it had always been inside her, waiting for her to hear it. She grabbed the edge of the canvas, her fingers pressed into the cool, slick surface. The painting started to ripple under her touch, like liquid. The door was opening. Vienna, Austria, 0702. Jakob had never been the type to believe in fate. He played his guitar in small clubs, hoping for a break, but he never thought much of the grand design of things. That was until the melody began to form in his head. At first, it had been a fleeting thought, a low hum as he tuned his guitar. Then it became louder, clearer. It wasn't a song he knew. It was a song he was meant to play. His fingers moved across the strings without him thinking, pulling notes out of the air like they were already there, waiting to be plucked. The sound, it felt like it was coming from somewhere far beyond. It felt like something was whispering. To him, not in his ear, but in the deep parts of his brain. The music made him feel like he was opening a door that connected him to a place he didn't understand, but he understood it now. He was being called. His fingers trembled as they struck the final chord, the last note hanging in the air like a breath that didn't belong to him. "You hear it too, don't you, Jakob?" Jakob froze, staring at the empty room. The voice was inside his head, but it didn't sound like his thoughts. It sounded like a truth he wasn't supposed to know. He lowered the guitar. His fingers shook, and the cold, otherworldly hum was still there, vibrating in his bones. He had been chosen, too. Tokyo, Japan, 8/12. J.S. Yumi had been a dancer for as long as she could remember. It was her escape, her way of feeling free. But lately, her movements had started to feel different. The music would play and her body would move, but not how it had before. It was as if the air around her was moving differently, pulling her in new directions. At first, she thought it was just the pressure of rehearsals, the fatigue. But then the dance had changed her. Her body was no longer obeying her. It was following something else, a rhythm that came from beyond the music, a pattern that wasn't human. One evening after practice, she stood in front of the mirror staring at herself. Her reflection didn't quite match her movements. She would twist and the reflection would twist differently, as if her own body was being pulled apart. That's when it hit her. The realization, she wasn't just dancing anymore. She was becoming the dance. The voice came to her in a whisper, but it was louder than anything she had ever heard. It wasn't just in her mind. It was in her body, in the space between her muscles. "You're already here. You're already part of it." She stopped moving, her breath catching in her chest. She looked at herself, truly saw herself for the first time. The mark had awakened her. Orion Redoubt, 8:08:45. GM Tallis stood in front of the monitoring station, watching as the reports began to filter in. The agency had lost complete control. The marked were waking up all over the world, their abilities blooming like flowers in the dark. But the real danger wasn't just their abilities, it was the shift. The name had begun its ripple effect. It wasn't just mutating their bodies, it was changing their consciousness, making them see the world in ways they weren't meant to see. And as the agency scrambled to contain the fallout, Hollis knew they were running out of time. The mark wasn't just a symbol, it was a key that was unlocking something much older. The world would never be the same. Elsewhere, in the Rift Valley, 09:00 GMT, the spire in the center of the Rift Valley pulsed again. It had never stopped. Each pulse was a heartbeat now, a loud throb that could be felt miles away. And from within the spire a voice echoed, more clearly than ever before. "Come. The door is open." Chapter 11. The path unfolds. São Paulo, Brazil, 10:32. BRT Carolina stood before the canvas, her hands trembling. She could feel the presence inside the painting, an oppressive weight pushing against her chest, a voice resonating deep within her skull. The shapes and colors on the canvas no longer felt like her own. They had grown beyond her, becoming something more, something other. She could see it now in the undulating spirals and the fractured patterns. The painting had become a doorway, and she was the key to it. She had heard the voice clearly now, no longer a hum, but words. "Come closer and it will open." It wasn't just the name speaking to her, it was the being, the thing that had started all of this. And now it was calling her. Her heart raced and she reached out, her fingers brushing the canvas. Suddenly the colors shifted, and the painting seemed to swallow her hand. For a moment, it felt like the very fabric of reality around her ripped. The world became a blur of motion, sound, and vibrations. And then, in the split second before her mind could fully process it, she was pulled into the painting. Her body felt weightless, as if she were falling, but no ground ever came. There was no up or down, just endless movement. And then, as if from a distance, she heard it again. You are the gate. You are the first. Vienna, Austria, 11 to 12. See, Jakob couldn't stop playing. The melody had taken over him. Every time he put the EOS guitar down, it felt like it was pulling him back, like he couldn't escape the sound. It wasn't music anymore. It was a message. He was sitting in his small apartment, fingers flying across the strings as he lost himself in the notes. The sound filled the room, but it didn't stay there. It grew, pushing out into the streets, weaving into the air, vibrating through the walls. And then, as his hands moved faster, more urgently, a shadow appeared at the edge of his vision, something darker than the night. The figure stepped into the room, but it didn't move like a person. It shifted, like it was part of the sound itself. Jakob froze, his fingers halting on the strings. He felt the air thicken, his skin prickling, with static. You know me. You know what I am. The voice wasn't his own. It was deeper, distant, and somehow everywhere at once. He felt it again, the pull, the irresistible force urging him to play, to continue the melody, to unlock something even greater. You will open the path. You will be the bridge. Jakob stood, his legs weak. The shadow moved closer and his breath hitched as he felt the presence brush against his mind. It was trying to merge with him, to make him its vessel. But a part of him resisted. A part of him didn't want this. He set the guitar down, staring at the shadow, feeling the cold air rush around him. No, he whispered. I won't open. For a moment the shadow paused and Jakob's heart thundered in his chest. But then the presence shifted. It wasn't angry. It was curious. Very well. The shadow seemed to retreat, dissolving into the air like smoke. The hum in Jakob's bones faded, but he could still feel it there, waiting. You will not choose yet. But when you do, we will be ready. Tokyo, Japan, 12:01. Jistumi stood in front of the mirror in the practice room, staring at herself. The dancer she saw in the reflection was not her own. Her movements were fluid, but they were too precise, too intentional, as if they were being controlled by something else. Her limbs moved, bending in impossible angles, following a rhythm that was now too perfect, too beyond her understanding. It was like the dance had a life of its own, and she was just a vessel, a puppet following the strings. The voice came again, not in words this time, but in the movement itself. You are the dancer. The pattern is yours to weave. Yumi's breath caught in her throat. She felt the floor beneath her shift, as if the very room she was in was becoming part of the dance. Reality itself was bending, echoing the impossible patterns she was creating. She didn't know if she wanted to run or surrender. But the pull was too strong. She stepped forward, her body moving almost against her will, until she felt herself spinning, spiraling down into the center of it all. And then, as she hit the ground, she saw a pattern, a fractured map of the world, stretching across dimensions. And at the center of it, the name. You are the dancer, and the dance will never end. Orion Redoubt, 12:45 GMT. Hollis stood before the viewing window, staring at the storm clouds that had begun to gather above Orion. The air felt thick, charged with energy, like the atmosphere itself was waiting for something. The data was coming in faster now. The marked were awakening everywhere, their powers growing stronger, their connection to the name deepening. Asha's face was set in grim determination. She had been quiet for hours, ever since the lights had gone out. Her eyes were dark, haunted. She had listened to the tape over and over, and now she was changing. The once practical scientist was now a gateway, a vessel carrying the truth of the name. But she wasn't the only one. The agency's control was slipping. The walls were coming down. The marked weren't just following orders anymore. They were following their own paths, and those paths were leading straight into the heart of the rift. Asha turned to Hollis. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "They're opening the door, Hollis. We can't stop them now." He nodded slowly, his thoughts racing. The doors were opening one by one. The fractures were spreading. It was only a matter of time before the world could no longer contain the truth. And the name? It was already inside them. Chapter 12. The Door to the Beyond Orion Redoubt. 1332 GMT. The silence in the command center was suffocating. The monitors flickered with static, showing chaotic readings, erratic behavior, and increasing energy signatures that were quickly spiraling beyond the agency's control. Brome stood beside Asha, his expression grim but his eyes were hollow. They had reached the breaking point. The name had broken through, not only into their minds but into the very core of everything. The very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel. Asha's face was pale, her eyes distant as she stared at the blinking monitors. The tape was playing again. The recording of the Eclipse, the low hum growing louder, resonating through her skull. She had heard the voice too many times now to be afraid of it. It was her voice now, just as it was in the others. "Brome," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I've seen it. I know what's coming. We can't stop it." He looked at her sharply. "What are you saying, Asha?" "I'm saying," she said, turning to face him, her eyes full of something darker than fear. "The door is already open. It's too late to close it." The walls of the room seemed to pulse with an unseen pressure, as though the very air was compressing around them. "We have to act, Asha," Brome's voice cracked. "If we don't, they'll come for us anyway," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We opened it. It's always been us." Brome's heart clenched. He wanted to fight, wanted to push her away from the edge of this madness. But there was a part of him that knew she was right. The name had always been there, buried deep in their consciousness, waiting for them to unlock the door. And now they had. São Paulo, Brazil, 1405. BRT Carolina's body was trembling, her mind reeling. She had stepped into the painting, the vortex of shifting colors and patterns, and felt the world tear open around her. The door had fully opened, and with it, a wave of new perception flooded her senses. She no longer felt like herself. Her body was alive with the pattern, with the pulse of the name that had been woven into her being. And now she understood. She wasn't just a vessel. She was the conduit, the pathway. Her body began to glow with the same ultraviolet hues that had seeped into her painting. Her hands, now glowing faintly, reached out to touch the air. Every movement she made left a trail of light, like a comet's tail that carved through the fabric of space. "You will open it." Carolina nodded, her voice a murmur to the unseen entity. "Yes, I understand." And the world around her began to fracture. Vienna, Austria, 1418. Yet Jakob couldn't escape the melody. It had taken over his life, his thoughts, his soul. Every time he put the guitar down, it was like the strings were calling him back. The sounds would echo in his mind, demanding to be played, until his fingers were moving once again, pulling notes from the air, carving new worlds from the sound. But now, as the melody deepened, something had changed. The air itself had shifted. A palpable pressure hung in the room, and Jakob felt his skin prickle as if the very atmosphere was alive. And then the shadow returned. This time, it was different. Larger, darker, more solid. It filled the room, and Jakob felt a voice speak, directly into his mind. "The music has reached its end, Jakob. You have brought the pattern. The door is open." Jakob stopped playing. His fingers hovered above the strings as his heart raced. "No," he said, shaking his head. I can't be the one to open it. I won't." "It is already opened. You cannot stop it. You have only played your part." The shadow closed in, its presence overwhelming. Jakob stood frozen, paralyzed by fear and the crushing weight of the decision he didn't know he had already made. Tokyo, Japan, 15. Yumi spun, her body moving in sync with the patterns in her mind. The dance had become something more, a series of fluid motions that bent reality itself. The room around her stretched, the walls distorting into abstract shapes. She was no longer just a dancer, she had become the dance. Her body twisted, the movements now coming so easily that they felt like part of the universe's own rhythm, each motion tracing lines through dimensions. The world itself seemed to follow her steps, bending in response to the dance. But it wasn't just the physical space that had shifted. Yumi could feel something else, a presence at the edges of her awareness, a dark whisper that urged her to go further. You are the pattern. The dance never ends. Yumi reached out, her fingers brushing the air as if she could hold the very essence of existence in her hands. And then, in the reflection of the mirror, something else appeared. A shape, a fractured image that wasn't hers. Her reflection smiled back at her, but it wasn't her smile. She gasped, stumbling back. It was the name, and it was watching her. Orion Redoubt, 1545. GMT. Hollis stood by the command center watching the world outside shift. The skies had grown darker, and the vibrations in the air were louder. The pattern was beginning to spread. He could feel it, not just in his mind, but in his body. He could feel it in the ground beneath his feet. It was happening. The door had opened. He turned to Asha, who was standing in front of the control panel, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Her eyes were no longer the same. They were bright, glowing faintly with an intensity that wasn't human. "Are we too late?" he asked, his voice trembling. Asha didn't look at him. She was focused, her expression more serene than it had ever been. "We were never meant to stop it, Hollis," she whispered. "We were meant to unlock it." The walls of Orion shuddered, and for the first time in a long time, Hollis felt the sickening truth settling in. They had opened the door. The rift was here, and nothing could stop it. "Come, the door is open. You are ready." The voice echoed across the air, deeper than anything human, reverberating through every inch of space. And at that moment, Hollis realized it wasn't just a door. It was a gate to something far older, and the world would never be the same again. Chapter 13. Beyond the Threshold. Orion Redoubt, 1630. GMT. The ground beneath Hollis's feet felt alive. It pulsed with energy, as though the very foundations of the agency were shaking with the weight of something otherworldly. The walls of the redoubt had long stopped humming with the familiar electrical buzz of the facility's systems. Instead, the sound had become a low thrum, a constant vibration that was getting louder, closer. Asha's fingers hovered above the holographic interface, her eyes still glowing faintly with the same eerie light. She turned slowly to face him, her expression calm, but there was a coldness in her gaze. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked, her voice softer than usual, almost detached. "The shift, the ripple in the air, it's here." Hollis didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. His chest was tight, and he felt as though the walls of the room were closing in around him. The sensation wasn't just physical. It was a feeling of presence, like something pressing against his mind, something ancient and unknowable. The agency had always studied anomalies, but this was a breach. It was beyond their understanding. "You've crossed the line," Hollis whispered, his voice shaking. Asha's smile was slow, almost sad, but there was an undeniable resolve in her expression. "We all have." Before he could respond, the ground trembled again, more violently this time. The lights flickered, and a sound like the tearing of fabric filled the air, a rift. Hollis staggered, his hand slamming against the wall for support. "It's happening," Asha said, almost as if to herself. "The door is wide open now. There's no going back." Hollis turned to the screens, his mind racing. The data was impossible to interpret, the readings more chaotic than they had ever been. There was a growing anomaly in the atmosphere stretching across continents. The marked were now active, their powers surging. And the name? It was everywhere. São Paulo, Brazil, 1702. BRT Carolina stood in the middle of her apartment, her heart racing, her hands trembling. The air was thick with the hum of energy, and the walls around her seemed to shimmer, like they were no longer part of the physical world. Her mind was caught in a whirlwind of colors and patterns, each one more intricate and chaotic than the last. The painting, the door. It was all alive. She could feel it, the connection. Her fingers twitched, and she reached out, but the space around her had already begun to distort, as though the very air was warping in response to her presence. "You are the gate." Carolina closed her eyes. She could hear the voice inside her mind, stronger now, more urgent. "You're ready," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her breath. "I'm ready." Her body shifted, and the world around her became a maelstrom of colors and patterns. She could see the fractured reality, the universe unraveling, the fabric of time itself bending. It was as if she were standing at the edge of a great precipice, staring into an abyss that stretched beyond comprehension. And then, from the center of the storm, she saw it. The shape. The being. It was an entity of pure energy, a swirling mass, of light and darkness, its form constantly shifting, evolving, becoming. Carolina reached out, her hand trembling. She could feel the being, its influence sinking into her like a cold wave, pulling her deeper into the unknown. Open the door, and everything will be yours. She closed her eyes, the words vibrating through her body. It was time. The pattern was complete. With a final, desperate breath, Carolina stepped forward, her hand pressing against the unseen threshold. Vienna, Austria, 1723. Siet Jakob had returned to the streets, his mind spinning with the melody that never stopped. It echoed in his skull, in his very bones. He could still hear the call of the music urging him to continue, but the air was different now. He felt it. The pressure, like the world itself, was closing in on him, tightening around his chest, making it difficult to breathe. He stepped into an alley, his fingers running over the guitar as if he had no control over his own actions. The melody began to rise again, a familiar hum building into a song. But this time, it wasn't the same. It was distorted, wrong, as if something had changed in the music itself. Jakob paused. His heart raced as the air grew colder, thicker. The shadows around him began to twist as if they were moving on their own. Figures emerged from the darkness, not fully human, their shapes distorted, as though they were caught between worlds. "You opened it, Jakob. You brought us here." Jakob's blood ran cold. He could see them now, the shapes, the beings. They weren't human. They were like fractured pieces of reality, living distortions that flickered in and out of existence. "No," Jakob said, his voice cracking. "No, I didn't want this. You have already chosen. You have played the music. The door is open." Jacob's hands gripped the guitar so tightly that his knuckles went white. His mind screamed for him to stop, but the music pulled at him, deeper and deeper, until his fingers were moving on their own, strumming a final, chaotic chord. The shadows surged toward him, their forms solidifying. The melody reached its climax, and Jakob felt himself pulled into it. His body became part of the music, his soul caught in the symphony of chaos and order. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. Tokyo, Japan, 1754, J.S. Yumi's body trembled as the dance surged through her. Her movements were fluid, impossible. They felt like they weren't her own anymore. The space around her had twisted, stretched, and she was no longer in the dance studio. She was in a place beyond, somewhere other. The air was thick, almost solid, and the rhythm of her body was no longer just a dance. It was a weapon, a key, a force shaping reality itself. The pattern is complete. The dance will never end. She felt the presence again, the being, watching, guiding her. It was both outside of her and part of her, its essence intertwined with hers, a reflection of the universe's own eternal dance. Yumi's reflection in the mirror was no longer hers. It was the reflection of something older, something beyond time. She reached out toward it, her fingers brushing the glass, and the mirror shattered. Fragments of light scattered around her like falling stars, and she stepped through the broken reflection, leaving the familiar world behind. Orion Redoubt, 1810. GMT Hollis stared at the now empty command center. The air was thick with static, and the screens flickered out one by one. The hum of the facility was gone, replaced by an unnatural silence, and then a voice. "We are here." Hollis looked toward the doorway, his heart in his throat. The beings had arrived. The door had been opened, and now the world would never be the same. Chapter 14. The Fracture Orion Redoubt, 1915. GM Hollis stood before the shattered glass panel, his face reflected in the splintered shards, though his eyes were focused on the emptiness beyond the threshold. The hum of reality itself had stilled, leaving only an eerie quiet. The air, heavy with the weight of the name, pressed down on him like a physical presence, suffocating in its perfection. His thoughts swirled, lost in the flood of noise and distortion around him. The beings had arrived. They were in the world, now, and they were changing it, bending it, twisting it, until nothing was certain. What could he do? What could anyone do? Behind him, Asha stood in front of the controls. She didn't seem the least bit shaken. She stood still, unbothered by the chaos unfolding outside, the new dimension settling like a cloak over the world. "They've arrived, haven't they?" Hollis asked, his voice hoarse. Asha didn't look at him, her hands still hovering over the interface. Her eyes were distant, staring at the fluctuations on the screen. "They're not arriving, Hollis. They've always been here. We've simply pulled the veil back." "Then why didn't we see them before?" Hollis's voice was sharp, desperate for an answer. "Because we weren't meant to," she replied simply. "The door was always waiting for us to open it, but we couldn't see it until now." The word stung, but Hollis didn't argue. What could he say? They had all chosen this. They had all opened the door. His fingers gripped the edges of the broken glass panel, his pulse racing in his ears. The name was growing stronger. Every part of the world was being drawn into its pull, and the marked were changing. And yet, despite it all, Asha wasn't afraid. She wasn't even hesitant. She had fully accepted it. Maybe she was right. Maybe all of this was just the next step. The world, as they had known it, was no longer in control. Something new was taking shape. "I have to go," Hollis finally said, his words clear and deliberate. Asha didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a strange sadness that made his heart stop. "You can't stop it, Hollis," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the static. "You've seen the truth, just as I have. We've all seen it." Hollis stepped back from the panel. "I don't care. There has to be something we can do." Asha's gaze softened. "What if the only thing left is to accept it?" Before he could reply, the ground beneath them shuddered, and the lights flickered. A deep rumbling filled the room. Hollis's heart pounded in his chest. The door had opened fully, and now everything was changing. São Paulo, Brazil, 1945. BRT Carolina had long since lost track of time. The world had become a blur of bright colors, ever-shifting patterns, and constant noise. The being had taken root inside her, filling her thoughts with endless whispers. She had become part of it, the pattern, the door. Everything was shifting. She could feel herself stretching across dimensions, her body becoming as much an idea as it was flesh. Her mind swirled in and out of focus, seeing the world from angles she had never thought possible. Every moment was a new fracture, a new reality unfolding. You are the pattern. Carolina's heart raced. She could still feel the voice, the influence of the being that had shaped her. It was there, a constant presence guiding her. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. The truth was now clear. She had unlocked something far greater than herself. The name wasn't a force to be controlled. It was something to become. The painting she had created, the one she had always thought would be a portal, had transformed into something more, a vessel. She reached out, her fingers brushing the canvas, and the painting pulsed with light. Her own reflection, distorted by the energy, shimmered in the surface of the colors. Step through. You will see what awaits. Carolina stepped forward, her mind flooded with images of other worlds, places she had never imagined but knew intimately now. With each breath, the pattern within her grew more complete. And in that moment she realized the truth. She wasn't just a conduit for the being. She was its extension. Vienna, Austria 20. Jacob woke to the sound of silence. His body was aching, his mind caught between fragments of the chaotic symphony that had consumed him. He felt like he had been lost in time, caught between worlds that pulled at him, dragged him, rebirthed him into something he barely understood. He had played the music. He had opened the door. And now the world was paying the price. He tried to stand, his body trembling, but his legs buckled beneath him. He could barely think. It was like the world was still playing the final note of a song that wouldn't. And he had been in the music. He had been a part of it. The shadows had been with him all this time, watching him, waiting for the final note to fall. But now they were here, standing in front of him. Their shapes were fluid, shifting in and out of focus, their forms bending as if they were made of light and shadow in equal measure. You have opened the way, Jacob. Now we are with you. Jacob's chest tightened. He knew what they were, he knew what he had done. But the fear that had once consumed him had faded, replaced by something else. Something older. It was the name. It had spoken through him, to him, and now it was shaping him. He stood unsteady, his eyes wide with the realization that he had crossed into something infinite. His hand reached out, but there was no need for words. The shadows gathered around him, filling the room with a dark warmth that was simultaneously comforting and terrifying. The music continued in his head, a perfect loop of creation and destruction. And Jacob understood that it had never really ended. It was only the beginning. Tokyo, Japan 2050. J.S. Yumi's body burned with the dance, but it wasn't her body anymore. It wasn't even her dance. Her movements had become part of the very rhythm of the universe, an expression of something ancient. The mirror had shattered. The world around her was no longer familiar, no longer solid. Every step she took sent ripples through the air, as though her body was molding reality itself. But it wasn't just reality she was shaping. She could feel the being in her, part of her now. Its presence was at once alien and familiar. It was like a language she had always known but never truly understood until now. You have opened the path, Yumi. You are the dance. You are the pulse. Yumi closed her eyes, and for the first time she stopped moving. The world continued to pulse around her, but she stood still, embracing the stillness, the pattern, the rhythm, the dance. It was all one. And as she stood, there surrounded by the broken pieces of what was once her world, she understood. She was not the dancer anymore. She was the dance. Orion Redoubt, 21 So. GM Hollis stared out of the shattered window of the control room, watching the sky crack open. The beings were moving now, shaping the world with their presence, warping it, reordering it into something new. Reality was shifting, fracturing. And yet, as Hollis watched, he realized that there was no stopping it. The door had been opened. There was no closing it. There was only acceptance. Chapter 15. The Awakening Orion Redoubt, 2230. GM Hollis could feel the ground tremble beneath his feet again, the entire facility vibrating with a force that felt too strong, too alive to be natural. He leaned against the cold metal wall, staring out through the shattered windows, where the night sky had become a swirling mass of shifting colors, as though the very stars themselves were blurring and stretching. The rift had widened. The world beyond the veil was pressing in, and it was unstoppable. His fingers tightened around the edge of the wall. The beings were here, And the marked. They were no longer human. The name had done something to them. They were evolving, becoming something else entirely. They were beginning to shape the world in their own image. Why are we still here, Hollis? Asha's voice cut through the silence, her words carrying the weight of a question that had no easy answer. She stood in front of him now, her form illuminated by the eerie glow from the distorted sky outside. Her eyes shone with the same unsettling light that had been growing inside her, that had been growing in all of them. The air between them crackled, with an unspoken tension. You know what has to be done. Hollis met her gaze, but didn't answer immediately. His mind was still racing, trying to piece together a plan that could somehow reverse this. Even as he knew, deep down, that there was no going back. The world was changing. There was no way to fight it. We're part of this now, Asha said, almost as though reading his thoughts. The name is everywhere, Hollis. It's too late to stop it. We've already chosen. Her words cut through him like a blade. The truth hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. They had all chosen this, whether they'd realized it or not. When they opened the rift, they opened the door to something that couldn't be undone. They had invited the beings into this world. And now, reality itself was warping. The once solid fabric of existence now a malleable thing, twisted and warped by the name. We don't have to be part of it, Hollis said finally, his voice rough. We still have a choice. Asha tilted her head slightly, considering his words. But what if choice is an illusion now? What if there's no going back from the patterns we've already set in motion? A deep tremor passed through the facility once again, and Hollis could feel the shift in the air as the walls of the redoubt seemed to flex, as if responding to the very presence of the beings. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his thoughts. But all he could see was the endless swirl of patterns, the very fabric of reality unraveling. He thought of the marked, each of them marked by the cosmic force they had unleashed. Carolina, Jacob, Yumi. All of them embracing their roles in the grand design. All of them changing. The choice wasn't whether they could stop it anymore. It was whether they could survive it. São Paulo, Brazil, 2245. BRT Carolina stood at the edge of the city, gazing out at the horizon. The being had merged with her, its form interwoven with hers in a way she couldn't entirely comprehend. She felt it in every inch of her skin, in the very marrow of her bones. It was as though her body was no longer hers. It had become something other, something that extended beyond the limits of her physical form. She raised her hand and the air around her shimmered, the space bending and folding at her will. She was no longer bound by the rules of this world. She could feel the patterns of existence shifting under her fingertips, reshaping the world in real time. But with the power came the weight of what she had become. The mark that had once been a subtle distortion was now a blazing sigil across her chest, its light pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. It was a symbol of connection, a reminder of her link to the being that had altered her at the most fundamental level. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of the world around her pulse through her. She could hear it now. The faint hum of energy in the air, the echoes of the name resonating in the back of her mind. The door had opened, and now she was part of it, part of something much bigger than herself. A voice echoed in her mind as, speaking from all directions at once. You are the key, Carolina. The pattern has always been in you. Carolina clenched her fists, feeling the surge of power course through her. The city behind her trembled, and the sky seemed to grow darker, the stars themselves flickering out. The being within her was growing, stronger, more influential. And then, in a burst of light, the air around her seemed to rip apart. The world was no longer a single place. It was fractured, distorted, a kaleidoscope of realities all blending together. Carolina felt herself stretched across multiple planes of existence, her body merging with the chaos. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. Vienna, Austria, 2315. St. Jakob stood at the center of the abandoned city street, the shattered remnants of the music still echoing through his mind. His fingers twitched, longing for the guitar he had abandoned. But the instrument felt far removed from him now. The song was no longer something he could control. The rhythm was now the world itself. He could hear the voice again, soft and yielding, like the whisper of the wind. The song never ends. You are the song. Jacob raised his head to the sky, feeling the overwhelming pull of the beings, the name, wrapping itself around him. The world around him warped, the lines between what was real and what was not growing increasingly unclear. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the air, and the atmosphere trembled in response. He could feel it, the truth of what had happened, the cosmic shift that had consumed the world. The ripple of the music was everywhere, each note, a perfect note in a symphony that stretched beyond time. And yet, as he stood there, Jacob felt the profound emptiness of it all. He was the song, but the song had no end. The infinite loop of creation and destruction was a cycle he couldn't escape. He didn't want to escape it. With a final breath, Jacob closed his eyes and let the music take him, let it consume him. The world around him fell away, and he became nothing but sound, nothing but movement. Tokyo, Japan. 3:45. Yumi's body glided through the air, as though weightless. She was no longer in the world she had once known. Now she was a part of it, a piece of the dance that now enveloped the universe. The edges of her vision shimmered with colors that weren't possible, and the air vibrated with the pulse of reality being bent to her will. The being that had intertwined with her had guided her, but now it was less of a guide and more of an extension. She was it, and it was her. With a single, fluid motion, she extended her arms, and the world around her rippled like water, the patterns of existence folding and unfolding in response to her movement. The dance, the very dance of creation itself, was now something she could direct. In the distance, the sky began to crack open, and Yumi could see the fractures, the rift between worlds widening, the barriers breaking down. The door had been opened, and now the beings were fully here. And Yumi? She had become the rhythm of it all. Orion Redoubt, 23:59. GM Tallis stood at the edge of the facility, watching as the world crumbled around him. The beings had fully entered the world. The marking was complete. There was no turning back. As the name settled into the fabric of reality, Hollis understood that there was no way to fight this. The world had already been shaped, and now, the true awakening had begun. Chapter 16. The Echo Orion Redoubt, Oro-10 GM Tallis, stood in the dimly lit control room, his fingers trembling as they gripped the edge of the console. The walls around him were no longer solid. They shimmered, distorted by the growing influence of the beings. He could see cracks in the air itself, thin, wraith-like fissures that ran like spiderwebs across the sky outside. He could hear it, too. The hum, the vibration of the name thrumming through the atmosphere, its rhythm, growing louder. The sound wasn't something you could describe in words. It was felt, a pulsating wave that crept under his skin, making his heart race in unison with it. The pattern was real now, and there was no denying its power. Asha stood beside him, her presence no longer a comfort, but a reminder of what they had become. She had already accepted it. She had embraced it. "They're awake," she said softly, almost to herself. "The beings have fully entered, and now nothing will ever be the same." Hollis didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was racing, thinking of the marking, the way the beings had left their mark on the world, how they had altered the very fabric of existence. It had been a ripple at first, a distortion too subtle to notice. But now? Now the world was shattering in ways no one could have anticipated. "Where do we go from here?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. Asha turned to him, her face expressionless yet somehow distant, as if she were already somewhere else. "There's no going back, Hollis. This is what was meant to happen. And what if we don't want it to happen?" His words were sharp, desperate. "What if we can't let this—" He gestured at the chaos outside, the swirling sky, the distorting landscape. What if we can't let it destroy everything we know? Asha paused, considering his words. She looked out the window at the fracturing world. I thought that too. But the truth is, Hollis, we've been blind. This wasn't about destruction. It was always about evolution. The air around them seemed to shimmer as if responding to her words, the power of the beings resonating through her. Hollis could feel it too, an unspoken force that moved through everything, shaping their thoughts and emotions. A sound echoed through the walls, low and foreboding. It was a deep vibration, an almost unfathomable hum that rippled through the very bones of the redoubt. Hollis felt it before he saw it. A presence, something other, something vast that loomed just beyond the veil of reality. And then, the doors to the control room slid open with a hiss. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, imposing, and shrouded in a blinding light that seemed to distort the air itself. Hollis's breath caught in his throat. It was one of them, one of the beings. Its form was indistinct, a shifting mass of energy that seemed to flicker between shapes. For a moment, it was as if it were a part of the very fabric of the room itself, its edges blurry, as if it existed across multiple planes at once. The air around it seemed to ripple and bend, as though the laws of physics themselves had been rewritten. Hollis stepped back, heart pounding in his chest. Asha. His voice trembled, low and uncertain. Asha, however, did not flinch. She stood still, her gaze locked on the figure. She was no longer the woman he knew. The shift in her presence was palpable. She was no longer afraid. You've come, she said, her tone reverent, almost in awe. I knew it was only a matter of time. The being's eyes, if they could be called that, flickered with a brilliance that pierced through Hollis's mind. The name was there, in that gaze, ancient, boundless, and full of understanding. It spoke, but not with words. The communication was telepathic, a torrent of thoughts and emotions flooding Hollis's mind all at once. You are of the pattern. You are part of the creation. Hollis's breath caught in his throat. The being's presence was overwhelming, suffocating, and yet there was something compelling about it. It wasn't hostile, not in the way he expected. Instead, it was like the shifting force of a storm, inevitable, vast, and consuming. The world is breaking, isn't it? Hollis whispered, though it felt like he wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. It was just a thought, a realization. It is not breaking, it is awakening. Asha's eyes gleamed with understanding. We have been asleep for so long, Hollis. We've been blind to the true order of things, but now the name has brought us to the edge. We can choose to embrace the change or fight it, but the pattern will consume us either way. The being's presence grew stronger, more tangible. Hollis could feel it now, the push of its energy against the boundaries of his consciousness. It was as if he were standing on the edge of an abyss, looking into the void, and yet he felt calm. The being extended its hand, and Hollis could feel its influence stretching toward him. He had the sense that it was offering him something, a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the pattern that he was still too blind to see. Asha stepped forward and placed her hand in the being's outstretched one. The connection was instantaneous. Energy crackled through the room, a brilliant burst of light and power. You have seen, the being said to Asha, its voice now a calm resonance in their minds. You have embraced the pattern. Now, you will help others see. Asha's expression softened, but there was no fear, only certainty. I understand. The being turned to Hollis, its form pulsing as it considered him. He could feel its gaze on him, penetrating, understanding. It wasn't asking him to embrace the change. It was simply showing him the truth. You will choose, it said. You will choose whether to remain in the old world or embrace the new one. But know this, the pattern is inevitable. And once the door is opened, it cannot be closed. São Paulo, Brazil 0030. BRT Carolina stood in the city, her mind alive with the pattern, her body intertwined with the very fabric of existence. She could feel the pulse of the world in her veins, the name vibrating through her like an eternal song. She had crossed the threshold. There was no going back. The air around her shimmered as she extended her hands, and the world itself seemed to shift. The city stretched and warped in response to her will. The beings were here, and they were everywhere. In the walls, in the very pulse of the city, in the hearts of those who had chosen to awaken. Carolina closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of the world around her. The old world was gone, replaced by something new, something infinite. And yet, in the midst of it all, she felt a strange loneliness, a sense that the door had closed behind her, and there was no longer anyone left to call home. But then she remembered. She was not alone. Chapter 17. The Choice, Orion Redoubt, Yarrow 45. Hollis stood still, unable to move. The being's words lingered in his mind, reverberating like a drum beat in his chest. The pattern, the cosmic order of things, was pulling at him, demanding his submission. Asha stood beside him, already embracing the transformation, already walking the path that was laid out before her. She had accepted the name as it was. She had become part of it. But Hollis? He couldn't. Not yet. Not until he understood. Why, he finally said, his voice hoarse. His eyes darted to the figure of the being, standing with its hand extended toward Asha. Why did you mark us? Why choose us? The being didn't answer immediately, its presence rippling in the air, almost like it was gathering its thoughts. Then it spoke, but this time, it wasn't in words. It was in emotions, sensations, visions that filled his mind. Images of stars collapsing, of galaxies shifting, of time itself unraveling in a spiraling dance. You were never chosen, Hollis. You have always been part of the pattern. You just didn't see it. The realization hit him like a blow. The name wasn't an external force that had simply selected them. It was something fundamental, something ancient, that had always been woven into the very fabric of their lives, their choices, their actions. They were part of a cosmic design, a pattern that transcended their understanding. It was everywhere, in every breath, every movement. Asha had seen it, embraced it. She was no longer the woman he had known. She had become something other, something tied to the vast expanse of time and space. Her eyes, now glowing with that otherworldly light, met his with an intensity that made him feel small. You're afraid, Asha said, her voice soft but tinged with the weight of a truth he could no longer ignore. Afraid of losing yourself, afraid of becoming something you can't control. But, Hollis, the truth is, control is an illusion. You've always been part of this. You just need to let go. Her hand reached out toward him, but Hollis recoiled, instinctively stepping back. The force of the pattern was too much, too overwhelming. It pulled at him, making him feel as though he were being drawn into the heart of the universe itself. I don't want to lose myself, Hollis said, his voice trembling. He looked at Asha, but his eyes were pleading with her. Tell me it's not too late. Tell me I can still make a choice. Asha's expression softened, but there was something final in her gaze. Hollis, the choice was never yours to begin with. You were part of this before you even understood it. The name doesn't give you a choice. It shows you the truth. The Kai, being standing silently behind her, extended its hand toward Hollis again. It wasn't demanding, but it was insistent. The pull was growing stronger. Hollis could feel it in his chest, in the very core of his being, as though the universe itself was calling to him. But still he hesitated. The choice is yours. The being's voice echoed in his mind, not harshly, but calmly. Embrace the pattern, or refuse it. Either way, the pattern will continue. The question is whether you will be part of it or be left behind. A shiver ran down Hollis's spine. He closed his eyes, but the images came anyway. Flashes of the marking, of the powers, awakening in those who had been touched by the being's influence. He could see Carolina, standing on the edge of the city, her body glowing with cosmic energy, her form bending and twisting with the force of the pattern. And Jakob, his hands raised, his body radiating music, his very soul vibrating with the song of creation. They had embraced it. They had changed. He had seen it with his own eyes, the way the world was reshaping, warping. People weren't just changing. They were becoming something greater, something connected to the cosmos. The boundaries of humanity were disappearing. But at what cost? He thought of the insanity, the destruction that had followed in the wake of the marked. The way their minds were breaking, unraveling under the strain of the transformation. Was it worth it? Was the power worth the loss? He turned back to the being, still waiting, still patient. The flickering lights of the redoubt were barely visible now, swallowed by the growing darkness outside, as if the very fabric of the universe was closing in on them. "If I join you," Hollis began, but he faltered, unsure of what to say. The being didn't wait for him to finish. "You do not join us, Hollis. You are already part of the pattern. You always have been. The question is not whether you can control it. It is whether you will become it or be consumed by it." Hollis felt something snap inside him, a realization, sharp and sudden. The pattern was not something that could be resisted. The beings had always been here, woven into the very essence of the world. They had never needed to choose humans. The humans had simply needed to wake up to the truth of what they were, a part of the pattern. He thought of the choice again, the choice between embracing the truth of the pattern or rejecting it. But now, as the being watched him, Hollis understood. There was no choice in the end. He could fight against it all he wanted, but the pattern was already inside him. It was inside everyone. It was in everything. He took a deep breath, his hand trembling as he reached out toward the being. The pull was overwhelming, like the tide pulling him into the depths of the ocean. And then, his fingers brushed against the being's light. So, instant his skin touched the being's presence. Everything changed. He was no longer in the redoubt, no longer in the world he had known. He was everywhere. São Paulo, Brazil, show 050. BRT Carolina felt the shift as soon as it happened. The energy that had once flowed through her now expanded, rippling outward as the very fabric of reality changed. She was no longer a single entity, but part of the larger pattern. It was as if the world had opened to her, and she could feel the threads of existence stretching across time and space, weaving together in a grand design. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. The city around her flickered, its lights dissolving into sparks of energy as she reached out with her mind. She was no longer bound by her body. She was in everything. The name pulsed through her, and she could feel its rhythm, in the very pulse of the universe. And then, as if answering her call, a new presence joined her, a presence she knew all too well. Hollis. She could feel him, his presence reaching toward her through the shifting layers of reality. He had made his choice, and in that moment the world changed. Chapter 18. The New World, São Paulo, Brazil, Woe 1. The world was no longer as it had been. Carolina stood at the edge of the city, her gaze sweeping across the horizon, her senses stretching out into the pulse of the universe. She could feel every heartbeat, every flicker of light, every particle of existence. The name had changed her. It had altered everything about her, but it had also opened her eyes to something greater. The world was changing, and it was beautiful. But the change was not without cost. She could feel the other marked now. There. Minds intertwined with hers, as if the pattern had woven their fates together. It was not just power they had gained, but something more, something cosmic, a connection to the very heart of creation. But with that connection came the fracture. It was inevitable. The world around her was warping, twisting as the beings shifted the very fabric of reality. She could see the streets ripple like water, the sky above crackling with energy, as though the laws of nature had become fluid. The rupture had begun, and it was only a matter of time before the world would either collapse into chaos or be reborn into something entirely new. Carolina's heart raced, her thoughts flooding with questions. Where was Hollis? Had he truly embraced the name? Or was he still lost in the conflict between accepting the pattern or resisting it? She could feel him, his presence, his choice, somewhere out there, and it was pulling at her. But the pull was not just hers. It was the pull of something greater than them both. The being had shown them the path. It had told them they were already part of the pattern. They had never been separate from it. They had simply forgotten. Now the choice was no longer theirs. The universe itself had set its course. Carolina closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath. And when she opened them again, the city was no longer the same. She was no longer standing on the sidewalk. Instead, she was surrounded by a swirling, shifting vortex of energy. She was everywhere and nowhere. The boundaries of her body dissolved, and in its place she felt the entire world. She could feel the beings too, not just one or two, but all of them. Their presence was like a thread woven through her, guiding her, pushing her toward the center of it all. The universe was a tapestry, and she was now part of its design. There was no going back. But where would it lead? Orion Redoubt, EO 115 GMT Hollis, stood in the middle of the redoubt, his body feeling light, as if it were no longer fully connected to the ground. His senses were heightened, sharper than ever before. The air itself felt alive with energy. He could feel it in the walls, in the floor beneath his feet, in the very space around him. The being that had touched him was still with him, its presence weaving through his mind, guiding him. Hollis knew now that he was no longer merely human. He was part of something far greater. He could feel the cosmic connection, the infinite web that stretched out across the stars, the threads of life, death, and everything in between. And yet, despite the awe, the overwhelming sense of power that surged through him, Hollis felt a nagging emptiness, a pull towards something he couldn't quite grasp. He closed his eyes, trying to focus, but it was as if the universe itself was speaking to him in riddles. "You are part of it now," the being's voice echoed in his mind, soft and distant. "There is no more separation, no more boundaries." Hollis blinked, trying to ground himself in the moment. The fragments of his old life felt so distant now. It was as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff, looking into an abyss. But the abyss wasn't something to be feared. It was the next step, the beginning of something greater. And yet, there was something else, a deep, unsettling realization that not everyone would be able to handle the change. Not all of the marked had embraced it. Some were broken. They had been consumed by the transformation. Their minds had shattered under the weight of the pattern, unable to comprehend what had happened to them. Was that going to be his fate? Would he, too, lose himself in the overwhelming tide of cosmic knowledge? Asha's voice cut through his thoughts. "Hollis." He turned toward her, but she wasn't standing where she had been. Instead, she was standing in the air, her form suspended, glowing with the same radiant light that had enveloped the beings. She looked at him, her eyes filled with the same cosmic understanding that had overtaken her. "You've made the choice," she said, her voice resonating in his mind, as if it were part of the very air itself. "But you still don't understand." He felt a pang of confusion. "What do you mean?" Asha smiled, a smile that was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. "You've embraced the pattern, Hollis, but the pattern is not just power. It's a new way of being. It's understanding that there is no true separation between us and the cosmos. You're no longer just you. You're part of the whole. And until you understand that, until you let go of the illusion of self, you won't truly be free." Her words cut into him like a blade, leaving him breathless. He had embraced the pattern. He felt it in his blood, in his soul. But her words made him realize something that had been lurking beneath the surface, something he hadn't wanted to confront. It wasn't the power he feared. It was the loss of self, the dissolution of the boundaries between Hollis and the world. The understanding that in this new reality, there was no such thing as individuality. He was becoming a part of something bigger, something that might erase everything he had once known about himself. He felt afraid. Small Asha seemed to sense his doubt. She reached out toward him, and this time he didn't pull away. Her hand, glowing with light, brushed against his. There was no pain. There was no fear. There was only connection. "You'll understand," she said gently. "Eventually you'll see that there's nothing to fear. The universe is not an enemy. It is a part of us, and we are a part of it." Hollis closed his eyes, his body trembling as the weight of the truth settled over him. The pattern was all-encompassing. There was no way to escape it. And even if he could, would he want to? Would anyone? As the cosmic energy swirled around him, he realized something. It wasn't about control, it wasn't about resisting. It was about becoming. And with that realization, he opened himself to the universe, fully, completely. Epilogue. The echoes of the pattern Orion Redoubt, 03 Mako, GM. The stars outside the redoubt shimmered like distant memories, their light reaching out across the vast expanse of space to touch the earth below. In the quiet hum of the facility, the echoes of the pattern reverberated through every corner of existence, bending time, space, and consciousness. Inside, the world had ceased to be what it had once been. Asha stood in the observation room, gazing out into the endless night, her form a silhouette bathed in soft, glowing light. Hollis stood beside her, no longer the man he had been. There were no words to describe what had happened to them, what they had become. The names were no longer just symbols. They were parts of the very fabric of the cosmos, the tendrils, of something far beyond their understanding. The pattern had claimed them, and in the process they had become one with it. The others, those who had been marked, had not all survived the transformation. Some had embraced the change, their minds and bodies merging with the cosmic force that now shaped the world. Others had been consumed, their minds lost to the overwhelming flood of knowledge and power. The thin line between creation and destruction had become blurred as reality itself had fractured and reformed. The world outside had begun its own awakening. The cities were no longer what they had been, twisted and reshaped by the influence of the beings. Some places glowed with an ethereal light, cities now alive with energy, as if the very pulse of the universe ran through their veins. Others had been consumed by darkness, the landscape broken and desolate, remnants of humanity's struggle against the inevitable. But there was hope too. Amid the chaos, new life was emerging. Those who had embraced the pattern had begun to teach the others, the ones who had survived the transition. They had formed alliances, built new communities, and learned to wield the powers that now surged through their bodies. Some had even found ways to communicate with the beings, seeking guidance, understanding the deeper mysteries of the universe that had once been beyond reach. Hollis turned to Asha, the weight of the moment settling over him. His mind was no longer his own. He could feel the presence of the name within him, the collective consciousness of all those who had awakened. The question of who he was, what he had been, had become irrelevant. He had merged with the pattern, and the pattern was all that remained. "There's no going back, is there?" Hollis asked quietly, his voice tinged with both wonder and sadness. Asha smiled, her eyes reflecting the light of the stars. "No," she replied softly. "But that was never the point, was it? We've always been part of the pattern, Hollis. The name wasn't a choice. It was a truth we had to see, no matter how hard it was to accept." Hollis nodded, feeling the pull of the pattern deep within him. It was both a comfort and a burden. He was connected to everything, to the people, to the cities, to the stars themselves. He could feel their hearts beating in time with his, their thoughts weaving through his mind, an eternal symphony of existence. But it was also an emptiness, a void, a loss of self. "We're not human anymore, are we?" Hollis whispered, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. "No," Asha said gently, "but we are part of something much greater, and in that, we are not lost. We are found. The air around them shimmered, and Hollis could feel it. The call of the beings, their presence rippling through the fabric of reality, sending ripples of energy through every living thing. It was a song that resonated deep within his soul, a melody of creation and destruction, of order and chaos. It was the sound of the universe itself breathing. "We have to lead," Hollis said, his voice gaining strength. "Not just for us, but for the others, for those who still don't understand, for those who are struggling. We have to help them wake up." Asha's gaze softened, and she placed her hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and steady. "We will, but we can't do it alone. The pattern is bigger than any one of us. It's all of us now." Outside, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The stars burned brighter. The fabric of existence pulsed with an energy that had never been felt before. The marked, the awakened had become the architects of a new world. A world in the process of being remade, one thread at a time. And in that moment, Hollis understood. The pattern was not a singular entity. It was an evolving force, one that would continue to shift and change, to grow and adapt. It was not just a cosmic design, but a living, breathing reality. It would not stop, not until it had reached its ultimate conclusion. Whatever that may be, the journey had only just begun. The end. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.